Communities in Place scrutiny meeting on Wednesday, the 5th of April. Apologies for absence.
Chair, we have apologies for absence from councillors Horncastle, Mather, Carr and Reid.
Yeah, thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting. Is everybody happy that they're a true and fair record? Anybody got any questions?
I'm happy they're a true and fair record. I've had a few questions about things, updates we were promised that I haven't received yet, but I could ask those later if you want.
Well, we may as well cover it now whilst we're on those pages. So yeah,
I think I picked up 4.
okay.
We were told that we'd be sent the charges, a list of charges for street works permits.
Right.
I haven't. I could have missed something, but no. Does anyone know when we haven't seen it? Also, one of us had asked for a profile of the individuals that submitted a notification of the firefighters. Does anyone know if we've received that?
I haven't received that. I remember the first one. I don't remember that one, but it was there in the minutes.
Yeah, that's why I remembered it, because I read it in the minutes. And John was going to check on the timescale of implementation for the bus service improvement plan.
Yeah, I spoke to Janice Rose after the meeting. She's going to come to the next meeting on the 26th to give an update. I mean, there is a report on the strategy that we discussed at the last meeting. I think the report's going to cabinet in May, potentially. But I said that was too long.
I was following mine.
Yeah, from your comments.
Yeah.
So Janice said that she would come and give what she could.
Yeah.
Cool.
And had also asked for a list of subsidised bus services, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll get that.
We'll get that at the same time, I imagine. Yeah.
I think, can I just say, what I actually asked for was the list of subsidised bus services at the present time.
Yeah.
And that's important, so every member has a copy of it and understands exactly which bus services are subsidised.
Okay.
Yeah, I made that request and
yeah,
in terms of responsible and
thank you.
And one morning.
There was next, just Sean, you were going to clarify the difference between.
I haven't had a response back from Greg, but yes, I did make the request, where it was a positive feedback.
management request, yeah, thanks.
Great. Is any, Brian?
Chair, I wasn't at this meeting, but it's a point of information for the committee, and it's around the utility companies on highway. I've had numerous meetings with people in department, and it's come to basically what I'm trying to get down to is that there's more training coming around the program of the One Network, which will educate everybody in Northumberland County Council. But what I've asked is that it actually it's kept back until May or June of this year, mainly to see what positions people are in on the new year.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. Good. So minutes. Can I have do we need a proposal and a seconder for these minutes, or do we agree?
Normally it's informal, but.
Informal. No, I'm fine. Does everybody agree that these minutes are okay? Yeah, thank you. Okay, disclosure of members' interest. Does anybody have any interest to disclose? No, that's great. The next item is the forward plan of cabinet decisions. This is here for information, and as we discussed at the last meeting, and I think there's been a lot of general discussion around sort of County Hall about it. The nature of scrutiny is changing, so we'd be less sort of likely to have automatic scrutiny of cabinet decisions. And there'll be more focus on actually scrutinising the effectiveness of what's happened. So, I think historically there's been a situation where a decision would kind of automatically go to a scrutiny committee of one sort or another, or to an audit committee. It would then come to the cabinet. Cabinet would sort of give a nod to the comments of the scrutiny committee. Nothing significant would change. And then the policy would be sort of implemented as planned. What this hopefully will do is actually focuses on, allow us as members of scrutiny committees to focus on what's actually happening out there on the ground, and so that we get the feedback. We are the sort of link between the council and residents. We get the feedback from our residents about what's happening, and we can use that to drive the scrutiny agenda. And then I'll come to you in a second, and on items where there's been a policy. So, for example, the policy today that we'll be considering on rough sleeping in the new way of doing things, what will probably happen is that wouldn't come to us now. It would probably come to us in 6 months' time after it's been implemented, so that we can get sort of feedback from our communities about whether or not it's working. I'm not sure not everybody will absolutely agree with that change, but I think that is a really good way to go, to actually affecting how things are working rather than sort of scrutinising almost for the sake of scrutinising.
I really strongly I disagree with that, Nick, totally, because I think decisions made by cabinet before they're scrutinised is a minority, a group of people in the council making a decision where it should be scrutinised, go to cabinet, and then scrutinise, and then 6 months later check the effectiveness of it. I actually think it's very, very unfair that this small minority cabinet make these decisions. It should, and I really strongly disagree with it.
Okay, I mean, there was two points I would make. I mean, the first point I would make is that this is being driven by the Canada Review and by the Challenge Board. So a lot of these changes are best practice changes, and those of us that have been involved with Ed, I can't remember his surname, Hammond, and the work that's been going on, looking at scrutiny, looking at the Constitution, looking at I think there's what they're doing there is they're looking across what works in other places. The second point I'd make is a personal opinion, very much a personal opinion, but it's to do with the fundamental nature of democracy. And in my view, the cabinet are the democratically elected cabinet, whether it be a Conservative cabinet or a Labour cabinet or a coalition cabinet. It's democratically elected, and its purpose is to make those policy decisions. So we may not always agree with those decisions. I wasn't a councillor before this administration, but I'm sure I would have disagreed with some of the previous administration's decisions, but I would have respected them as their democratic right to make those decisions. So
And I'll make sure it's noted that I
absolutely, yeah.
totally 100% disagree with that.
Well, one of the things we might, a scrutiny committee somewhere might be able to do is scrutinise whether or not the changes to scrutiny have worked. So it's
That would be put forward. that
yeah, we
really-
could, but let's let it get bedded in. It's going to be a while before it happens, and
I should just,
Yeah.
can I just on point, the report that Ed Hammond is preparing will actually go to the council AGM 17th of May. So that discussion and that feedback will actually be quite welcome as part of that.
certainly you'll have an opportunity there to,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm actually quite shocked.
And the work that we're doing,
Remember, but I'm shocked.
the work that we're doing now is in preparation for those changes.
And I think it's important to say this is not a thing, I don't think, that's being proposed and led by the administration. This is a thing that's coming from the work that's being done as a result of those reviews. So it's a sort of Councillor.
Yeah, can I just say I'm going to agree with Ivan because, first of all, I have to agree that actually this isn't, we're not here to discuss or anybody here to tell us what we're doing at present time, because it will come, it's a constitution matter, and it will be decided by the constitution, the whole of the council. So to say that it's going to change and this is how we're going to work, I think is prejudging the outcome of the council. So I think that if we were to have an honest discussion, we've had them at the Constitution Working Group where we considered, I'm not on the group, but we had the bigger one where we had everybody in, and people discussed it openly. And actually the reaction wasn't exactly what you said. So I think to actually prejudge something is undemocratic. And I just think we should wait until we all see the report, then we can all have a good look at it and make our judgment as elected members of what we think is best for us as members of a scrutiny committee to ensure we get the best out of everything for our members, not for the members, for the residents. So I think to prejudge or say this is the way we're going at the present time is not the right way forward. So I would wait until we have the full council when we can have it properly aligned to the democratic route. Is that all right?
And that is the intention to have the report presented on the 17th of May. But I just want to say that obviously as officers, we have to make preparation for next year.
Yeah.
So the next timetable meeting, just the housekeeping, the book, the rules and that sort of thing, all has to be predicated on the assumption that the report is being, but obviously we can change the.
Yeah, so it's a direction of travel. That's where it appears to be heading based on all of those meetings, and we'll make final decisions at the AGM in May. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nick, let's speak. I've got to put it on record that I agree with my fellow scrutiny colleagues. I do believe that there is a position for post and pre-scrutiny. I think the direction that we're going into with the post scrutiny is that, you know, the whole idea of scrutiny is to filter in more information and have them deep dives and more intense conversations, not to pull a policy down, but to make sure that it's belt and braces as far as our level is.
Okay. Can I say
Just, you know, but on a personal thing, that's fine for you to have a personal opinion, but the reality is sometimes we've had pieces of work that has been given to cabinet within 2 days later. So I haven't had that 6-month low. So we haven't had that time for it to settle, and we've had to have comment on it. So the reality is I welcome the fact that you're going to see it. If cabinet make a decision on it and it's the wrong decision, at least we can look in 6 months' time, not 6 days afterwards. And also, I would like to think that when we put a report together, it doesn't go to cabinet the next day, because there needs to be a conversation about, again, a belt and braces policy. If this is the way the chair wants to go, that's fine.
It's right. Okay. Well, can I just stop this now? Because I kind of wish I hadn't raised it now, because I was just trying to give the committee a heads up on the direction of travel. I thought that might be useful.
And based on the
But if we
committee,
can keep the debate until the actual decision is made, and then we can actually focus on the business in hand today, that would be useful. Yeah. So that was I was just trying to explain why the forward plan of cabinet decisions is on the agenda. Does anybody have any comments on that forward plan? No. Okay, we'll move on to the item 5, which is the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy for Northumberland. Oh, sorry, we are, yes, apologies. Yes, we're going to change the agenda, and we're going to move on to the reports on the section 106 of the community infrastructure levy. Rob needs to get the way of the gossip with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is the third of the annual new style report on infrastructure funding generated by the planning system. It's a statutory requirement to send a return in.
Rob, sorry to interrupt. Councillor Carty can't hear you. Could you mind speaking up a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Rob.
It's okay, yeah. So this is the third of the annual new style reports on section 106. Receipts in terms of infrastructure funding we've negotiated from developers. It's changed each time, hopefully to be more clear on feedback both from this group and from the LACs. As the covering report said, Deagle thought ours was just about the best one nationally. And I thought it was nice and clear. And the public will be able to understand it. The actual details of it are in the attached documents on our website now. I think it's probably just worth me taking to the executive summary, which gives the headline points, and that was the amount of money that we secured through agreements was just over £13.5 million last year. The amount of money we received was about £4.5 million. There's also about £3.5 million we got through highway agreements. And on the books, we have about, well, just short of £11 million generated through 106 and developer contribution process. The thing for the future is that government is currently consulting on a move to a tariff-based approach, which would mean that you would draw infrastructure money from a wider tax base effectively, because all developers would pay it on a square metre value depending on final sale price. The amount per square metre will be negotiated and set locally and subject to viability testing. So there will be some concerns to whether or not we will get this amount of money in through a wider tariff-based system, but I'll need to bring a report back on how we're going to approach any new replacement system for doing developer contributions, both through exec, through the and this group. Otherwise, I think the report speaks for itself. I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you very much. Right, does anybody want to take the report as read? Does anybody have any questions? Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Rob. I didn't quite understand what was meant by the total amount of money retained was 10.8 million. And you just said it's the money that's on the books.
Yeah.
So is that basically what's in the kitty?
Yeah. Basically, what you've got, and the reason why these figures are all different, is that when we sign up, right, on the executive summary page, that first figure involved the amount of money to be provided under planning obligations at 13.6 million. Is that were effectively legal agreements are signed, but those developments may not have physically started or hit trigger points, so not all that has been paid. The second figure is not a subset of that first figure, because it can relate to money secured under legal agreements last year, but only if it's trigger points this year. So that's how much we received last year. And the secured the amount of money retained is the amount of money we've got collected that we are yet to spend. That is an issue because sometimes, say, if you are getting a number of contributions, say, to a large school extension, you have to wait until you get the third contribution until you can then have enough money to pay for the school extension, say. And equally, a lot of that is earmarked for affordable housing, and affordable housing schemes are taking some time to get through the system and get delivered for a variety of reasons, including, I would note, community resistance to schemes.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that? So the 13 million, sorry, 10, the 10 million is the money retained. Is there would it be possible to get a figure that shows the money retained as being effectively secured and then paid, isn't it? It's, if I'm understanding that correctly.
It's
secured is when you get the agreement that it will be paid.
Basically, right, I put it another way. The first figure is during the last 12 months covered by this report, the amount of effectively contracts we've signed where the developer has to pay 13 million. They only have to pay it when they build or finish what they're paying it on. During the last 12 months, the schemes that have started and hit trigger points, which may include some of those at the 13.6, will probably more relate to ones from earlier years.
Yeah.
That's the amount of actual money where we've got a check in the post.
Yeah.
Okay. The highways fund is secured by a similar parallel process. The amount of money retained is where we've got the money in. It has got things focused for spending on, which is covered in the rest of the report. And we're waiting for contracts or schemes to go ahead. Apart from that element, which goes into a pool-based, the pool-based approach is things like the housing, the developer fund, where both ourselves and registered providers like housing associations apply to a federal grant, and also some of the sport and play money, which is distributed on a local basis, is in a pot for that. But remember that a lot of that also can be spoken for by us agreeing to pay money to schemes, but those schemes not having hit the trigger points where we pay them. In other words, they haven't built, say, half the buildings. And what we do is we normally pay in arrears. So if a parish council normally wants to put a new playground in, we'll ask them to get the orders paid and then we'll reimburse them. We sort of a clawback if it's not spent within a certain period and we reallocate it.
Right, so I think I understand that. So is it possible therefore to get a figure that shows the, well, we've got a figure for the amount of money that's in the pot already that we've actually got. But there'll be, and we've got the money, the figure for what's been achieved in the last year.
Yeah.
But there'll be money from previous years that hasn't yet, because the nature of these developments sometimes are 3 or 4 years before. So is there a cumulative figure that shows the amount of money coming down the road that we haven't yet received?
There is, and that's further down when you look at the figures for the areas that there's a figure there called potential.
Okay, so that's in the breakdown.
And that figure, those potential figures add up to a much higher figure than that secured.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, that's clear. That
Yeah. So and we call it potential.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we will sign up a legal agreement with a housing company who will be given, say, £1 million, but actually the commercial decisions or other factors in the marketplace playing out, that say Bellway will decide not to build that housing estate either short term or at all. So potential is not always realised.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so Councillor Castle first and then Councillor Dale.
Yes, obviously, it's very complex. Members do need up-to-date training constantly on this. And even those that think they know what they're talking about, it's still changing. The question I'm asking is the criteria has changed into basically area-based criteria. Does it affect the trigger points in any way? In the means of deciding when it should be paid changed in this changing criteria?
What we do is the trigger points are also subject to negotiation, because that's rooted in cash flow issues for a developer. So I'm not naming them for any particular reason. We'll say Bellway are building a site with 400 homes on it, and housing companies tend to make how their business operates. They set up each separate housing site as a separate sub financial entity. So they will say to us, well, if we can pay you on the sale of the first third and the first 2/3, rather than pay you up front, we will pay you more. And we will make a valuation based call on it, whether it's better to have it up front so we can use it for certain things, or for us to push the receipt further down the project path so we get more in. And that is done on a case by case basis.
And so,
The only thing is the new approach. The reason why government is seeking to change all of this is because what you can guess is that this involves negotiations on every site to get to the package, the legal agreement, the triggers, the monitoring. Whereas a tariff-based system where you pay on sale, almost like a tax, would be much easier to administer. Against that, I think we would probably get less as a total. But there are strengths and weaknesses to both systems.
I think I see now what you're saying.
Well, and I would add, obviously, where you have very high sales values, like in the southeast of England, a tariff-based approach generates huge amounts of cash.
Exactly, not necessarily here. Partners and houses, the work involved.
Yeah.
And it's a legal agreement. Once that is agreed, negotiated with the developer, it is a legally set agreement. That is not subject to any kind of change once it's agreed.
It's a legal agreement, and the strength of that is it is not a condition or restriction on the site. It is a legal agreement, so it cannot be changed unilaterally by either ourselves or the developer.
Some changes things on the site, which is bound to happen.
Sometimes he will ask for it to be he or she will ask for it to be renegotiated. Say if the scheme changes or there's a collapse in the market. But if we want to sit back and say, no, we don't care, put our fingers in our ears, we do not have to agree to changes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dale.
And I just to respond to that one, I think we've had, been on the planning committee long enough, you'll realise that we've had a lot of times when developers have come back to have the 106 agreement lifted because they can no longer afford part of it to actually pay that 106 to pay parks or whatever, and that's been ongoing for years and years, makes everybody very cross, or you change the number of affordable housing. Part of I would like to go to the community infrastructure levy in Northumberland, but one of the things that, or two things that I'd like to point out is that I would like to have the education part of it looked at, because we had a planning application for 10 houses. Attached to that was the sum that was to go actually to the high school, a brand new high school, while the local village school was falling to pieces. Now, there's something wrong there. If the village itself is actually taking the houses in, which is brilliant, they can't any longer because they stopped it. However, the point being was the funding had to go to the high school. And the first school is badly in need of funding. Now, that has to be looked at again, because it's not right that should happen. So everybody, we were very cross about it, but anyway, the planning application hasn't proceeded at the present time. Secondly, I would like to say about the sports development areas, which were put down. Originally, Tyndale, part of the person who actually wrote the policy, was that local villages could have 106 funding for houses for their play parks. But then there was a broader area, which was the development of sport, and that was put into areas of, for instance, one of my villages goes in with Corbridge, and another one goes with various other areas. Anyway, the point being is that I don't know whether that's still working and how actually that's managed, because obviously the 106 agreement legal part of it isn't strong enough, and that needs to be explained better. And the last one is, which you don't have to reply to any of those, because they're just points really. And the last one is basically that Northumberland is not charging, there is currently no common community infrastructure levy charge in Northumberland. And we're not a charging authority. Why is that? And what is the benefit of not being a charging authority?
Okay, right. Firstly, in your example, it's an interesting example of a school, a village school that is in need of maintenance costs and education contributions from 106 going to a upper tier school. All of these negotiations are carried out on the basis of evidence, and they are not meant to, the money is not meant to address existing problems. It is meant to tackle the impact of the development. So if the education authority's advice to us was that the costs associated with the new development and was having to expand a school fell at a certain point in the educational hierarchy, that's where the money has to go. The strength, I'll answer your third question of this, the strength of a levy-based approach, which the government is mooting, is that we would just get the cash and we would spend it according to an infrastructure improvement and delivery strategy. So we could use it for maintenance and for addressing existing problems. And also the parish and town councils would like to get 15% of that take automatically, which would raise to 25% if they had an adopted neighbourhood plan, which included an investment strategy in it. The reason why we haven't got to SIL at the moment is the reason why, it's part of the reason how I explained the new government proposals. You've always, well, the last 10 years, you've been able to pick either to use section 106 or community infrastructure levy. And absolutely for this county, like much of north of England, the take would fall if we use the community infrastructure levy, because you can't double dip on both. What governments are saying is they are going to potentially take away that discretion and require everybody to use one single consistent tariff-based approach.
Which would be, not SIL.
Sorry.
It
Gordon, I can't
will be a
hear
new
you.
version of Sill. Sill would disappear.
I couldn't hear what you said, Gordon, sorry.
Sorry, I was saying, what does that mean if it's a new approach? Is it one or the other? He's saying it's a completely new.
It's a new approach, and Sill would disappear, and section 106 provisions would be either changed fundamentally, but they wouldn't do the same role. So we have taken a decision, like the majority of northern authorities, not to use Sill. I'll give you one example. When I was chief planner at Sheffield, I inherited a decision to use Sill, and we were taking, as the fifth biggest city in the country, about £8 million a year. And I know districts in the southeast of England who are getting £400 million a year because of the difference in the land value. So,
I've got a different thing.
okay, and so the second point was about, you made 3 points. One was about
One was about
schools, village school.
what I'm saying is about the play parks and the
Yeah,
sporting
yeah, I don't, yeah.
I think, can I just explain to you that obviously it's key that where we have no build in rural areas in particular, because we're not allowed to build in rural areas, there's no 106 funding available. So when we look at the SIL, which if we did have one, it says, basically it was about having be fairer. I'm just trying to find this point. To the levy and to wider system of developer contribution.
Yeah.
So basically, if you look at the map where the contribution has gone, you can see where they haven't gone.
Yeah.
And these small areas, small villages are suffering. We haven't got any housing. We're not allowed any housing. And we've got no 106 agreements therefore, or funding. So, I mean, I have to say that the, village people are very resilient and work very hard to get the money down. But, it's just an overall problem of
It is.
of lack of housing in the rural areas and not having the funding developed further.
And if I can just very quickly touch on something that we use developer contributions in section 106 agreements to secure affordable housing. We argue to get the most out of the system at the public examination, and the development industry pushed back, such that what we do now is we can ask for developer contributions for affordable housing on schemes of 10 units or more. And when you look at the distribution map, as you say, where the schemes are, that also hides the fact that in the southeast of the county, they are large schemes that can generate affordable housing. And if in rural areas, even though you'll be getting appropriate scale development, that often will not be schemes of 10 units. So there is a mismatch in that government has pushed for a couple of decades its responsibilities for delivering affordable housing onto the planning system. And again, that works under conceptualisation of a generic somewhere in England where your housing is just delivered by large housing sites. So there's a mismatch there, and that's why we have to look at the council's own building programme. We have to look at things like community housing projects, and we will need to look at other opportunities because there is a mismatch there. And finally, on that subject, I would add that the problem with government, I'm not making a political point here, but government's reliance on the planning system to deliver affordable housing as an element of market housing is subject to the problem that as the housing market falls, less homes get built, therefore you generate less affordable housing. But actually, in a falling market, the demand for affordable housing goes up. It's a
I think any housing would be appropriate in the rural areas.
Big shout out for some more community housing. Councillor Gallagher, and then Councillor Morford.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
I very much welcome the new approach. I think there's a lot of holes in the programme that we've worked over the years. Couple of points I want to make about the process of planning. I know we're talking about 106, but I'm looking down the list of people, the education, ecology, healthcare, highways. They're all the people that benefit from a 106 payment, but yet they're the ones that don't give any feedback on it or anything back from planning. So I would like to think that we actually got a little bit of feedback from them people. coming back to it was the money is not spent, I think you've kind of cleared that up, but I would like to have dates alongside those applications. And I also, I would like to chase up historic monies.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple of times in the past, you know, and I'm talking about a lot of years ago, where we nearly lost developers' payments of 106 money.
Yeah.
So the reality is we have to scoop that up and officers have to be on top of that. Because that, you know, it might be the one I dealt in was £6,000. £6,000 is a lot of money to a little community. And ironically, the company on a deadline date, we're going to get that money back. So we have to be quicker at that. You also said we have to, the developer and the 106 money have to, you know, there's an agreement. There is an agreement. And there's an illegal agreement as well. But I'm mindful I've got a housing estate in my town that was built probably 15 years ago with the promise the play areas would be put in there. The young families that moved into that particular development, the kids have grown up now and are probably working and they don't need that play area. So the full idea is it has to be delivered in a timely way and not at the end of any project. And you also said something about we have to be very careful on the markets. So we're always looking at the price of houses dropping and how we can help the developer. Let's turn it around the other way. What happens if the price of houses go up? Do we claim anything back from that developer as an additional? And the reason why I'm bringing that up is when I was chair of Southeast area, there was a one development that this authority decided to give a discount to. We shouldn't be given any discounts to anywhere. They are making money on a development. So that money should have actually come back and helped that area itself. So no refunds, keep an eye on any market, and if it collapses, or better still, if the price of houses go up, that we should benefit from that. So it's a live, constant review of the 106.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you. Jim.
I can respond to that very quickly, yeah. I had an audit done of all the 106 processes, and we've made lots of changes to cover some of the points you made. I do now, and we didn't used to do this, I'm sometimes happy to negotiate getting, let's say, 50 quid per house, use a made-up figure, rather than 55 quid if the developer agrees to what I call a clawback provision. And that's it. So they obviously try and put in as many front-loading costs as possible to make their construction costs as high as possible on the book value. And they also say, oh, we won't get very much money for these houses. We have clawbacks in. It's based on market sale rate. So we can go back and get a ratio back. And we actually do that as well now for ourselves because we've sold some sites to housing developers on the assumption that they're doing X and they've got X plus Y. And we have clawbacks in those now as well to get money. Just what you said about the receiving departments or organisations not giving much feedback. One of the recommendations for the long delayed LAP review is that planning committees should be provided with a sub-report on just on developer contribution side of developments, and that could be shared in advance of the committee before the negotiations are fully complete, such that the chair and the local ward member can just cast an eye of it and make sure they are broadly happy with the approach being taken on the, not the total amount of money secured, because that's a viability based argument, but on the distribution of the money between the various asks as set out in this report.
Okay, that's very useful.
Yeah, just on the back of that last point, I totally agree with what you're saying. The sub-report would be an extra. A response would be good instead of no reply. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Morfitt. Thank you. I've got two similar questions and a third one at this time. So on page 57, it explains, presents the figures we were talking about earlier. and it shows that the amount we received was substantially less than the amount to be provided.
Yeah, which is a natural mathematical function of the process, yeah.
Yeah, so I understand that there's reasons why it will tend to be less, so like, for example, if developments don't go ahead. But is it always less every year? Or is there a particular reason why it's so much less?
I would say it will always be less.
Okay.
Not because of the fact we won't get it, it's the fact there's a lag between the negotiation and agreement. And sometimes housing sites, particularly the largest ones, can take 10 years to build out fully. If they're on stage payments, you will not get everything up front. So there has to be, I think, a natural delay between securing and getting. And because this report, by statute, is an annual return, there is invariably going to be a mismatch between that agreed and that secured.
I would have thought that money should be provided several years ago might be getting spent now. And therefore we would actually be spending as much as was to be provided.
Well, that, yeah, just to be absolutely clear here. And this is useful because actually, from what you're all saying, I think I could actually lay this out slightly differently. Remember, this is this is just looking at the last 12 months. So what it's saying is that amount of money is that agreed, and that's the amount getting in. As I said, part of that relates to the former figure, but part of that relates to other figures. But actually, in some years, what you could see is arguably 0 as a first figure that we've secured nothing new, but you could get in 20 million.
Okay.
It all depends on the scale and types of development hitting fashions. And finally, I'm not going to take up time on this, is we did word section, when I arrived here, we were wording section 106 agreements remarkably inconsistently. So we've had to piece together the overview on historical trend to be going into every single 106 and teasing out all the different trigger factors. Whereas hopefully all the ones we're signing now are all to a much more consistent template and lend themselves to easier reporting.
Yes, okay, thank you. Second question is similar. On page 59, we've got figures about how much money we received and how much we spent. I think we spent less than a third of what we received. Why is that? Is that a typical occurrence?
Yeah, and it need be a typical occurrence, but it's a general occurrence, because when we manage because we say do not let contracts or say building affordable housing until we've got money in the bank. And some of that money is not just we are getting it, it is tied to a particular area, a geographical radii for the original scheme. So we have to have a scheme there that when we get the money in, we get that scheme rolling, and that scheme can take time to deliver. One of the inconsistencies, and I won't go into detail now because it's that much more mission. One of the inconsistencies we had was that we either specified schemes that money was going to go to, we specified areas, or we didn't specify an area. So teasing out the historic trends was very difficult because it's made opaque by the different restrictions on different amounts making up any of these figures at any time. But I will rerun another section 106 training course for members.
Thanks. Could I ask a quick first question? Yeah. Don't know if this might overlap with what Councillor Dale asked earlier. Looking at the table on page 59, there's very little allocated for healthcare in the west of the county, and there's nothing allocated for highways in the west. Why is that?
Right. We react, when we have scheming, we consult all the list of people who are eligible to request contribution money from us. Now, the new local plan sets out a long list of things it could be used for. And if it transpires that, so in one part of the county, a new health centre has been completed and opened recently, they may not be asking for funding in that part of the county. Whereas if in another part of the county, there is both the need to open a new major facility and there is a shortfall of other elements, for example, GP surgeries, dentists, whatever, then there can be very much of a fluctuation between areas. What we used to base those decisions on is the feedback from the various entities who ask for the money and a very chunky document called the Infrastructure Delivery Plan, which underpins the local plan, which sets out the assumptions of the amount of money we will need to respond to the growth set out in the local plan.
Thank you. I think a lot of the questions have been around the sort of understanding the numbers. So I just wonder if this report comes back in any new scrutiny arrangements, it could have a sort of summary table that basically sort of sets out money achieved in the year, money received in the year, and then the cumulative amount of money that hasn't yet come in from prior years and the year that's being reported on, as a sort of summary by geography and
we've had an attempt at that.
Yeah,
if you scroll right down to the end of the report of the actual report itself, and it's broken down by local area committees. So that was the feedback I got last year.
Yes, I think that the way I read that though is that relates to the sort of individual this year.
Yes.
What would be useful would be to have the sort of cumulative position of any outstanding money, because it's if you know that there's sort of £10 million coming in for education, but it's from prior years, it's a very different thing to say we secured £1 million in the last year.
Yeah, it is, and I can say the problem is almost overlapping different ways of doing this.
Yeah.
It's actually the potential column by lack area from the total figure at the foot of each page, which is on the bottom left. That figure adds up to a much higher figure than any of the figures in that.
Yeah,
so
I think it just so that we can, that's easily understandable. It's sort of, none of us are.
Can I say finally, I know we need to move on. The other way of looking at this is actually not summarising, it's the raw data, because we have Excel spreadsheets with every single agreement.
Yeah.
And members may find that interesting to see what's happened to various agreements they saw made history.
Been secured, what's received, and what's still to be received.
A one pick of data dump.
Okay, one last final question from Councillor.
Just add, because I think you mentioned about the size. If you take in, sorry, I've lost the page, but if you take in transport, highways, you've got Benicia Roseborough, 899,000, right? I'm not sure, and this is where we want to differentiate between what is building, which is actually a small estate, and individual houses, because I think there's a big difference between the estates that are being built. If you build this as an estate somewhere, you're going to have a lot of 106 funding, right? In the rural areas, in our area, right, we're generally having one or two houses. And I think what we need to understand is how much 106 funding is coming in, at what level, because there's a big difference. So if you want to put infrastructure in Benicia and 800, that's a lot of money, but that possibly is just one estate. Does that make sense? So it's not lots and lots of money coming in, just one estate. And I think what we need to do is understand the actual rurality against the urban, where the big build is and what the small builds are. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And you're probably going to get tired instead of yes, but it's a bit more complex, because what the figures won't show, and we attempted to draw out the section 278 highway agreements, because they do not relate to the same subset as the overall bill contribution. The issue with highways cost, though, is sometimes they give us the money to do the work and we commission it. Particularly it needs to respect a few sides. At other times, the developer does the work itself.
Yeah.
And it won't show on this, it won't be a contribution, it'll just be a cost side then.
And that would be the same with play areas and things like that, wouldn't it? It'd be sort of, where they put a few toadstools and a swing into a new estate.
Well, that
itself.
point that Brian makes, I think that's a design point in that while it's reasonable to phase in payments for, say, long-term contributions to healthcare capacity, I agree with Brian that elements of the site that are directly usable by those residents needs to be there when the residents resort play areas. Yeah.
Right. A very quick point on this one. What I got from this here, well, I know you want to move on, but it's very simple one. You seem to be telling us now that the case for neighbourhood plans is strengthened, has increased by what?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's
And
quite an important.
as cards on the table, I'm a complete convert to neighbourhood plans since I've been here because I've seen A, what can be done, and B, the way the national legislation is going. And remember, all that we've said, the headline is that this is all mired in super detail to justify each line against each type of contribution for each scheme. A tariff-based system, we also get the cash spend as we would want to on our own priorities, but the parish or town council would get 15% of that. 25% if they're the main neighbourhood plan. For some places, well, I think it addresses the point that Anne made there. Because if it would be a general broad-based tax base from it, whereas not just schemes of 10 houses or above, that even one house in a parish would generate some money. It might not be much, but actually, if it's a small parish, a few of those could allow with a new car park.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Right, we'll close there. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you very much.
And we'll now go back to item 5. And I think, Bill, you're going to start. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, but for the record, can I say it's the last time I've had a planner group before? I'll keep this fairly brief because I'm supported today by Julie in respect of this particular paper. So this is Julie Stewart, who's my strategic housing manager. People haven't met her before. Just a couple of comments on the report itself at a high level. First thing, just to highlight, this report's gone on the name of the executive director for Jill O'Neill. I'm currently actually reporting to 2 executive directors. I think it's a timing issue when this was prepared. This was at the transition of Liz Morgan. So this paper, strictly speaking, should now be in the name of Janice Rose, who I'm reporting to for housing matters. So a couple of just high-level comments. Most, if not all, members will have heard either Julie speak, me speak, or one of Julie's colleagues recently at the LAC in terms of rough sleeping and homelessness. Have just completed the 2 issues there. Because we've done a number of presentations to LAC between November of last year and March of this year. So some of this hopefully isn't new to you in terms of some of the challenges that we're facing in Northumberland. In terms of the actual need, you will see from the report, and say Julie will take you through in a bit more detail and answer questions. There is a statutory responsibility on us to produce a strategy itself. That strategy, or this strategy, if you like, is informed by both legislative requirements based upon the local authority guidance, but I think also it's informed by consultation that we've undertaken and application of previous policies and working within this area for many years. So yes, it is very much driven by officers in terms of what the policy should look like. But as I say, it very much reflects what we have presented for many years, and it is a refresh, important to refresh of the previous policy. In terms of the priorities, again, what you will notice that we've actually seen a reduction in priorities from 7 to 5. But if you look at actually the priorities for this proposed policy vis-a-vis those for the previous policy, they are broadly similar, melded together in one way or another. We are not saying things are less important in Northumberland County, that's no longer a priority. It's more about how we're presenting the priorities to you and the actual work that we intend to do. That's probably saved the exception with the one which was around welfare reform, etc., which was very much a transitional issue for us. 2 final comments. One query I get quite often, and Julia will get quite often, is around Homes for Ukraine. And how do we support residents in terms, how do we support, sorry, guests who arrive from Ukraine, who may become homeless because there's a breakdown with the host, etc., etc. That's probably a whole separate discussion outside of this, because this policy relates to it, because residents from Ukraine are afforded certain access to homelessness, etc., and support from the county council, so they are covered by this policy. But the thing I want to highlight with you is that government released a fund of circa £500 million earlier this year, which was referred to as the Local Authority Housing Fund. We have, or Northumberland County Council have, taken up an allocation of that, and there's two parts to that. One part is to specifically support our commitment to supporting refugees, and through that we'll be acquiring additional homes, probably of 4 bedrooms or larger, and that's specifically for the refugee resettlement programs. So these are people who have previously travelled from Syria, Afghanistan, etc., etc. The other part of what's referred to as LAF funding, just as the Local Authority Housing Fund, was specifically targeted to actually assist potentially with homelessness arising from the Homes from Ukraine programme, because government realised or recognised that when the Homes from Ukraine programme was set up last March, it was very much seen to be a time-limited activity, but obviously what we have seen is the war continues, etc., and more people are displaced. Our numbers haven't really increased significantly over the last couple of months. There was a significant rise in numbers early on, but we have started to see some breakdown in that host-guest relationship. So what we have done is we've taken up an allocation of that funding, which will allow us to acquire, because it will more likely not have to be by acquisition, 8 homes, which we are now actively looking at the market to buy, because we have to have this completed by November 23 for the funding. And those homes will be specifically used as first allocation in use for people who have travelled in the Homes for Ukraine programme and are then at risk of, are then homeless. In an ideal world, and I stress an ideal world, we will try to acquire homes in areas where we have the largest population of people who travel from Ukraine, because one of the biggest challenges we face is where you have somebody settled in a community, let's say in the north of the county, where we have no housing accommodation, and they want to stay in the north of the county because the children have settled in schools, etc., they've got employment. So we will be using that LAF funding to acquire 8 homes. If we're successful in delivering that, we may go and ask for more money, but it's quite a tall ask, actually finding and buying and completing the purchase on 8, well, arguably 12 homes between now and November 2023. So I just wanted to put that in as a comment. Yes, it's not, I don't really want to get into the detail of that today, but it is just a reflection of what we are trying to do to support homelessness. So Julie will wish to comment upon the report itself. My final comment, because this always comes up in this discussion, is hopefully members have seen within the actual strategy, and it's on page 33 of your report bundle, we have put in a specific, well, not specific, we have put in the definitions which we recognise for homelessness and rough sleeping. Because I think sometimes in conversation we conflate the two issues, and there is a significant difference between rough sleeping and homelessness. So yes, the strategy relates to both, but we need to be clear about when we're talking about rough sleeping, are we talking about rough sleeping, or are we talking about homeless and vice versa. So it is just to highlight with members. And at that point, if you don't mind, I'll pass to Julie if she has any additional comment, or we'll take questions. Okay. Thank you, Julie. You want to add anything?
Just the final comment is just an observation for members. We received for 23-24, we've got a homelessness grant allocation of about 529,000. For 24-25, it's been confirmed at 556,000. We have had a slight reduction in comparative scale. We would normally expect about 570,000, so it has reduced. But it is still a reasonable amount because we have seen other local authorities whose allocations have been halved under the homeless prevention grant. But a lot of that grant is actually used to help fund the existing service. There's not a lot of flexibility within that to commission any additional services. We are seeing across the service a consistent peak. We used to see peaks and troughs quite regularly, but now it's just a constant battle against the numbers that are coming through, which the team are seeing on a daily basis, and trying to manage expectations of how we can support people is quite a challenge. Although we will respond to everybody as quickly as we can. We're also seeing a shift in the profile of people, and it is harder to get people into the private rented sector because of the changes within that sector as well.
Thank you very much. I'll just make a Chair Roberts and make a point first. I think that definition of rough sleeping and homelessness was really, really useful. I thought it was very clear and actually, and I think the point that rough sleeping is very visible. Homelessness is probably almost invisible. But the question is, are there any sort of, when you talk about the peak in terms of the overall demand for services, but are there any hotspots in terms of where is it happening? How is it spread across the county?
We recently got some figures together for the Ashton and Blythe local area council actually, which were for for where we are in Northumberland currently. And that actually said that about 68% of homelessness is in the southeast of the county, which you would probably expect because of the population cluster. So highest in Blythe, and then Ashton, and then looking at Newbiggin and Bedlington after that. But it is really what you would expect. We are seeing a higher demand in Hexham and Haltwhistle area, and in Berwick. But the challenge there is often where people can be placed, because we have limited temporary accommodation in both areas, but we are exploring that a bit more. We've recently taken on an additional property through Advance in Berwick to help expand our temporary accommodation option up there. And that was not just following feedback from the local area council there when we went there, but actually we've recognised that we needed more options around dispersed temporary accommodation. So we're trying to do as much work as we can around that. So yeah, I think it's probably where you would expect, Councillor, but we do see demand in other areas of the country.
Right. Councillor Dale first, and then Councillor Carson.
Two very quick questions, sorry, thank you. Sorry, my God. How many people are actually on the housing list? Homeless list, the housing list. See, just to say when you know it's been constant, it would be quite good to see. I know it goes up and down, but if it's staying at a higher trough now, what level is up there? And the other one is, what was the other one I was going to say? Start with that one first, and I'll come back to the other one.
We recently did a tour of what we call band P priorities, which is the highest band, and I think that was about 197, which were as homeless.
197.
Right. But we actively work with those people.
Yeah.
The overall applications we received when these figures were done for the March LAC, we had 2,491 applications during 22-23, and 361 of those went through full application with temporary accommodation. So, but we do have a very large housing register as well.
That's what I was really asking for. It's an overall picture about how you know what sits in there.
So,
I know it's just a different one, but I think it gives you an explanation of the bigger picture.
Well,
Just to add on that, I do know that there's obviously problems with private rental as well now. So you know, there's a whole big thing about which is actually making it more difficult for you to deal with homeless people.
So we're probably seeing about 11,000 on the housing register. However, and there's a however to this, when you break that down, and I'm looking at Susan here and trying to gauge this, there's probably about 50% of those people are probably in around about band 3. So that means they have no identified housing need. So they're on the register, but they are adequately accommodated. And then when you break that down, we're moving to band 2, and that's broken down further, and then band 1 and band P. And band P's are probably again certainly less than 100. So the other people in that urgent housing need in Northumberland. What you have to remember the housing register is, well, there's a couple of things you need to remember the housing register. One is not all people who are on there, especially the band threes, are going to get accommodation. And not everybody is actively bidding for homes.
Absolutely.
So they've registered, but they're not actively bidding because we operate, as with most authorities, what's referred to as choice-based lettings. So gone are the days when the council would just say, that's your house and we'll allocate it.
Yeah.
This is about choice. So some people register with us and all they're looking for is one house. So they're quite happy where they are. They're just looking for an opportunity at some point in the future. The other thing is that with the register, it is not simply ring fenced to people in Northumberland. So there will be people on that register who are living outside of Northumberland at this point in time. So yes, can't deny it's a big number, but when you start to break it down, the numbers that we have in urgent housing need is it's a much smaller proportion. The challenge I think we face, and I'm talking a bit for Julie here, is that we are seeing, I think, a number of different reasons coming forward for homelessness. Historically, a lot of it was associated with complex needs, etc., etc. We are seeing landlords coming to question, Councillor Dale, about the private sector. We are seeing issues now where within the private sector, landlords want to put their property to an alternative use, or they want to sell it, or they want to make it into a holiday home because the return on a holiday home will be probably 4 times greater than you would get as a rental value. So we're seeing people who've been in settled accommodation for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, where they are getting what's called a no-fault eviction. So it's a Section 21, where the landlord is simply saying, I'm taking back possession of my property. So that's always been there, but it's more of an emerging pressure at the moment. I think the other thing just to be mindful of is, and it's probably something I'd refer to on the next report as well, there is a significant focus on housing at the moment in terms of government. So we've probably said this before, the private sector accounts now, or did until recently, I think it still does, accounts for more of the housing provision than social housing.
Yeah.
So there's more coming through the private sector. There is an ambition from government to actually regulate and control the private sector much closer. Talking about applying what we have lived with for many years in terms of a decent home standard, that housing has to meet the standard, etc. Talking about potentially with this concern about Section 21, that could only be issued by the tenant, and also potentially moving away from potentially assured short-hold tenancies of 6 months and having longer secured tenure. All of which, I can understand why, etc. However, the private sector is very concerned about being regulated by the government, and there is a potential risk that private or some aspects of the private sector will move away from housing for that purpose and move it to a different use.
There's also tax implications.
So there are a number of pressures in there. Probably got slightly off the report, but hopefully that gives you an answer to your
No,
question.
thank you, because I think it's interesting for everybody to actually understand the whole of your context of what you're working under and the difficulties you're working under.
Thank you. Councillor Carty.
Right, mine's just about, it's just a quickie, right? You see, I'm perhaps going to buy about 8 homes or 12 homes for refugees, Ukraine people work. I work with a lot of these communities, the Syrians, the Afghanistans and the Ukraine families. About 2 or 3 months ago, I had an influx of Ukraine families coming in, so concerned that a 6-month tenure in the house was going to be up. What's going to happen to them? And then I was told, and I don't know if this is correct, a person living who's housing a family can give them a tenure up to a year after 6 months. I don't know if that's right. But then after a year, what happens? Is there a chance to stay on with that family? Well, because I even offered the council to come into the sessions that I work with the minority groups to explain what would happen. Because I had some extremely worried Ukraine families coming in.
So the 6 months was only ever, so when the Homes to Ukraine programme was initiated, as I say, the government's expectation was it would be short-lived.
That's right.
So all they said was, for you to be a host, you must meet certain requirements. So that was around DBS, quality of housing, etc. And you must make your house available for 6 months.
Yeah.
That was the minimum. There was nothing then said that you couldn't extend that and extend that. We will have some people who will have come across in the first tranche from Ukraine are still with their host.
That's right. That's just what I want to ask.
That is a that's personal arrangement between the family and
The family.
the host itself. Again, it was an increasing concern for government, and again, I'm with the Julie here because I can't remember the figures, I should do. The families have always received, sorry, the host has always received a goodwill payment every month.
Mhm.
And there was a concern that, because of cost of living crisis and a whole range of other things, that it wouldn't be sufficient to persuade people to keep offering the homes.
Yeah.
So the government, as of this year, have extended the goodwill payment. Basically what it says is if you have a family with you for 12 months or more, the payment increases from
I think it's from 350 to 500.
Just,
And there's no tenancy,
No.
so there's nothing that needs to be ended. There is, as
Yeah.
Phil said, a personal arrangement between the host and the guest.
Okay.
So that host can keep that family as long as they want.
as long as they want.
We haven't been given a restriction on how long we would pay that goodwill payment. However, what they have done is they've actually reduced the tariff that's been given to local authorities from the beginning of January, down from 10,300 to 5,500, I think. I'll confirm the figures for the minutes, Nicola, for you. So there is a reduction in the tariff that the council is getting for any new families that are arriving.
Right.
Yeah.
So that has, they will have to factor that in as well.
Because I mean, honestly, the offers there, because I work with the minority groups, but it's mainly the women's school, but it's mainly the women that ask these questions, it's there. So, that offers there anytime in the future, if you just want to come and do a workshop to the centre.
Well, I know you know Diane Monroe, and
That's
she
right.
coordinates the team, so we.
I did that forward, but I haven't had anything.
I think because we do have specific resettlement officers that do work with the families, they would be able to address that directly.
Right.
But certainly if it emerges as another issue, then certainly if it can talk about it.
I mean, I have done in the past, anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, councillor.
Yeah.
Councillor Paul.
For simply, I understand fully with a choice-based letting system, we have quite a while on the housing register. Does it apply in any way to homelessness, in the sense that someone may be homeless but still employed in a certain area and moving them into another property way out of where they're presently living might put pay to their employment? Are these factors taken into account
They are to a point, yes.
to a point?
Because what,
And an example, that's why.
if somebody is in, say we accommodate them in temporary accommodation.
Yeah.
And they would get a band P priority homeless.
Yes.
They are given up to 4 weeks to bid on appropriate properties.
Ah, right.
If one was suitable, the theme of they could go for that.
Yeah.
However, we can't leave discharging my duty outstanding
No.
for a long period of time.
Right.
So if there was a property that was in the local area that they could reasonably travel to,
Yes, I get the idea.
then it may come to the point where we decide to say, we've discharged your duty, you've refused a reasonable offer,
The best.
now it's up to you. Yeah.
Right, that's clearer than I had. Thank you. Got that one.
Thank you very much, councillor Morfitt.
Thank you. There's a few references to actions which are planned in the future in the strategy. It's been mentioned a housing advice website, an action plan, and also testing of the strategy and the action plan. I was just wondering if you might be able to give us an idea of the timeline for those three things.
I think it's something that we talked about maybe with Dawn for future scrutiny. What we would do is once we've got today, if everything progresses, we would start working on production of the action plan, which would then be shared, and that would be monitored on a probably initially a quarterly basis, with feedback to members as requested. And then we could produce an annual report if that would be of interest to people about how we're progressing against the action plan.
So you're going to be starting the action plan soon,
Yes, very soon.
presumably the testing comes later.
Yes.
You don't have a sort of date for when you'll be.
Well, we would
Test, yeah.
potentially test it on a quarterly basis because that would be the review point.
I think just one thing we need to stress, this strategy is following on from previous strategies. The work of the team is the work that, we haven't stopped doing what we're doing. We will just continue what we do. I guess the strategy will influence how we do it or what areas we focus on. So I wouldn't want members to think because we haven't got an action plan, we're not delivering a homelessness service, because we deliver a homelessness service 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Is there a sort of rough timeline for the website? And also, will people still be able to access the same support by phone and face-to-face when the website's up and running?
The website is tied in with the development of the updated council website, so we're working with Jim Boland and the team on that, and we've been talking about what we would like to see as part of that. So that will be reflected in like Place Cube and how that's developed. I'm not sure of the timeline for that yet, Councillor Morford, but we are working with them very closely on that, to make sure it's accessible. That'll have primary information. It won't be the sole way of sourcing information though. The team are contacted now by telephone quite regularly, and we have recently introduced face-to-face appointments. We're doing those at the library where we'll have a drop-in 1 day a week. We're exploring how we do that in Ashington. We were thinking about doing it with the information centre, but because that's moved into Ashington Town Hall now, I don't think it's quite the right location for that. So we're going to explore with the job centre in Ashington whether we can do that. And we did that pre-COVID in Blythe and it went really, really well with the job centres. So we're exploring all of that to reduce an element of face-to-face. It won't be face-to-face every day, and it won't be in every area every time. It'll depend on demand. And we are trying to introduce options, and we do offer Teams calls as well as an option as well. So we're trying to expand, reproduce the best way that people can contact us.
And again, the thing I would add to that is the normal way to contact the service is through the traditional if it's not face to face, it's through the contact centre. But we do offer, we introduced this probably, I think 2 to 3 years ago. There is a free phone number contact as well for the service as well. So it may be that an individual will come through the contact centre and the contact centre then refer it on. But there is an actual free, as well as the normal means of contact, there is a free number in there as well.
It's an interesting one because we did originally have a hunt group, but because everybody now works on mobile phones, that's not an option. You can't have a hunt group with mobile phones, sadly. So we're trying to replace that.
This telephone upgrade might allow that, mightn't it? Yeah. Is that it, Nick?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Geiger.
Thank you, Chair. Just bring up on a couple of points that Councillor Capital had made about the idea of rehoming somebody who becomes homeless. I was involved with giving advice on one young lad who had been made homeless in Ashington, and the only place he could actually get for a short amount of time was Blythe. And he was doing some work experience, ironically, in Pigswood. So, you know, the help, and it's taken on your point about employment or commitment or education as well. We've got to think of that in the best and the clearest way possible. And it was only because the guy kind of challenged you guys and you helped them out, and, you know, thank you for that. Just a couple of points on page 13 where it's a link to the corporate plan, and it says on living and learning, it says support the most vulnerable. Can we not change that up? Something like all the vulnerable, because that seems to, for me, it might just be the way I'm looking at it, that we're only going to look at the people that are in dire needs. So maybe have a look at the, you know, if you're vulnerable, you know. The other thing was on page 14 on at the bottom there, the background, is it, you know, at the bottom paragraphs it says there is also a new duty of public services including NHS, trusts, prisons, job centres, and it goes on. But the reality is that tells me that there's going to be more work and more pressures for you to do with it. And I want to flick back to page 60 when it says human resources and it says none. I would say you need help and you need more help.
The referral has been in place since 2019, since the Homelessness Reduction Act came in, and we don't actually see a lot of it. It's not. It's used a lot by the probation service to give the heads up about somebody who may be coming through. But it's generally people that we would normally see. So that hasn't added a significant amount of workload. I would have probably agree that human resources is always the
I'll
key.
try my best.
I don't know, you are. Human resources is something that we do need additional resource where we can. It's the budget to do that.
I think, yes, I can make several comments as not going directly. The comment there obviously relates to the policy, you know, in terms of what we're bringing forward. As Julie says, I think there's probably every service director would probably make a case or suggest there's an argument for additional resources, you know, because demands are changing on us.
But just to reply from that, this is a scrutiny meeting,
Yeah.
which is asking searching questions this year. Do you need any more help? Because we see, or I see that you do. Thank you,
Chair. There'll be more staff.
I don't know, anybody who's coming to that.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Moore and then Councillor Todd.
Just a quick question. Priority one talks about including services for rough sleepers and single homeless people. Could you explain why you focus on single homeless people? Because I don't see why they would be more vulnerable than homeless families.
It's a definition that the government brings forward, and they do focus on single homeless people because often it would be single homeless people who are sleeping rough. And generally these may be people who are more complex and may have substance misuse issues that would lead them to rough sleeping, tend to be single males, and they are quite hard and challenging to place in suitable accommodation because of their needs and how they affect other people. Now, the majority of temporary accommodation in Northumberland is shared accommodation, and often these people aren't safe either to themselves or for themselves, to be placed and shared, which is why we've brought on more online, more diverse models. But that's why there's that specification is brought out, because it is one of the more challenging groups. I wouldn't say they're of, you're absolutely right, families are as vulnerable, but there tends to be more options for families, believe it or not, than single homeless people.
Thanks. That makes sense. But would it not be more sensible to say that would improve services for rough sleepers and homeless people with multiple complex needs?
I think we capture the complex needs later on. It's because I'd say it's aligned with the definition under the Homelessness Reduction Act. What we've got.
I think the other comment I would make is the key word to priority. Again, it comes back, it's not that we aren't doing that. It's comes to a point that Julie's made. This has been identified as a particular area of challenge or particular area of concern. But yes, we've got better arrangements in terms of families, etc., use of shared accommodation. It is that the actual access to services are less an issue. That's why it's a priority for us to enhance it. It's not saying the other ones aren't important. It's just a bit of a gap for us at the moment. That's why it's a priority. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Carty.
Yeah, and I just want to agree with what you're saying. I think some of the shared accommodation is very unsafe for some people. And, you know, I have the hospital opposite centre, and we've seen that. And we suffered from having the shared accommodation here at community centre, right? The other thing is, I do want to say, I think it should be applauded for how quick it's adapted to the Ukraine crisis, the Syrian crisis, and things like that, because these were really scared, vulnerable people coming into the country who wanted to stay at home with their families. There's been families split up, siblings left over there, and the mum's got one sibling here, and one sibling's been left over there. So for them, it's been such a traumatic time. So well done for what you've done in that respect.
Thank you. I'll pass that on to the team, Councillor Carty. I think from a standing start to where we've got to was a testament to the commitment of the team and our ability to recruit them to do it.
And I'd just say, not just in terms of actually direct sort of support and provision, but also the support that you gave to individual families that were looking to host. It was a bit of an administrative nightmare for people to understand what they needed to do and how they would go about doing it. And the advice that people I spoke to got from the county council, and I assume it was your team, was very good and very quick.
Yeah, a question of rough sleeping specifically. I'm the veterans champion for
Yes.
the council. When we last checked, actually couldn't find any veteran rough sleeping in Northumberland. Anything an answer, so presumably, maybe I know that we asked us, possibly lovely, isn't any? But with rough sleeping, the one case I recently dealt with in Attic, they declined any help. That's been refused. And much of this comes down to mental health issues. And I guess the council can only do so much.
Absolutely right. We can't force the services on the people. We can help them if we feel that somebody has got a mental health issue or another complex issue. We'll try to link them in. We've got we do commission through Changing Lives of Homelessness Response Service, who are specifically trained to go and talk to people, even if they don't require help there and then, but to just help them and direct them into support should they need them. We also utilise Widget Trauma Traveller Liaison Officer when he's available to deal with an authorised encampment, Ken McDonald, to do that. So we do offer help and support, but you're absolutely right. Some people prefer, they actually sometimes feel safer being where they are.
Yes.
And as long as they're happy.
And I'll just add to this, as a councillor, I have to say publicly, look, we'll do what we can.
Yes.
The person concerned, I feel like many people know, the person you're referring to declined further help.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
the end. Thank
I
you.
think because they're so visible in Northumberland,
Yes.
it's so rare,
It is raised.
or reasonably rare, that's why it prompts quite a
Public
response.
Thank you.
Right, I'll allow one more question on this before we move on to the next paper. Councillor Dale.
Yeah, just one very quickly to say that the people who are actually seeking or are homeless, some of the numbers are hidden because they're actually staying with parents or anybody, who will put them up because they haven't got anywhere to live, but they don't want to be homeless because they don't want to land somewhere where they don't want to live and the children at school and things like that. So I do have that, when people ring me about that. The other thing is just very quickly, do you work with other social housing providers apart from the council ones? Are they part of the Homelessness Act? Do they have to work with you? I just wondered, so.
No, it's a challenge that for us because obviously sitting within the housing service of the county council, we've got myself as director, Susan's here representing the housing management function of our own stock, which is about 8,500 units.
Yeah.
Julie's representing the strategic part of the service, which deals with homeless and housing options, etc. And in practical terms, the other providers don't have any duties upon them to assist. So when potentially Julie is looking to discharge statutory duties under the Act itself, and again, let's say it's a question in Berwick, we have little opportunity to do that because we don't have stock. If it's South East, it potentially isn't, I would say, easier for us to do it because we actually control the stock. And unfortunately, what you will often find is that, well, sometimes there is just a general reluctance to do it on behalf of some providers. That is a possibility. But equally, there are some times when the individual themselves is intentionally homeless or have criminal history or whatever, and actually it becomes very challenging because everybody should have a right to go have a home in some way, shape or form. But actually, we often as a county council become the last option, or last resort, and last option, which from a housing management perspective then creates us challenges because yes, we want to assist, but then we're sometimes trying to balance the needs of other people in the community or the suggestion that we use certain places just to place individuals who nobody else wants type thing. So it is a difficult circle to square on that one. But the duty housing and homelessness is a county council duty to discharge.
No, that makes good sense because if you're homeless and you're saying, I'm just saying, say if you take the Tynedale area, and you want to stay in the Tynedale area, there's very few homes that you actually, I don't think you own one, you might own a handful in the Tynedale area.
We've got a couple in the west, but what I would say, I don't want to paint too grim a picture because we do work with housing providers. We do work with them, but in strict terms, the duty, the requirement to discharge the duty.
Yeah.
What I would
would say is though we have recently done some work with the VCA to get some temporary accommodation to again increase the offset for people under home to Ukraine when they're being displaced. And we are actually taking a couple of units in the sheltered accommodation unit to give us another option for temporary accommodation. So we're trying to explore different options with them, if as to increase the availability of housing, but we can't mandate, as Phil quite rightly said, to say we'll take
The
them.
shelter one's an interesting one for us now, because I think the picture, as I say, there is a stereotype, you know, in terms of homelessness, etc. But that's false. There are so many people, I mean, it's often been said here too, wage backs away from being homeless, etc. So there's a complex, there's a varied mix of people who can be homeless for various different reasons. Our offer, yes, traditionally is temporary accommodation, in fair accommodation, etc. But as Julie's highlighted, we recognise that wasn't always the most appropriate or suitable. So we have looked to take on some units in sheltered housing. So for those people who may be elderly, etc., and maybe better housed than that accommodation, albeit on a temporary basis, that's the sort of thing we're trying to explore, rather than just saying it's a single approach of temporary. We're looking at dispersed, we're looking at shared, we're looking at sheltered as well.
Thank you. It makes much more, well, for me, when I've got local issues, it explains a lot better. Thank you for that. And it's a big picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on to 6.2, section 106 infrastructure. Sorry, 6.2. I think in terms of recommendations, I think we've noted all the points, support the work that's being done. I think there were some specific,
Well,
points.
I think the main point is to invite Julie back in 6 months, 7 months' time to discuss the action plan.
Yeah.
And progress against that.
Yeah.
Now, so what Julie on that. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Yes, it was.
So actually, we are on the 6.1, which is the social housing regulations bill. And actually, just whilst we're doing this, just a note, I'm not sure we did at the beginning, Colin Castle sent his apologies. Yeah, thank you.
So again, introduce Susan, if people don't know, Susan Ogle, Housing Operations Manager for Northumberland County Council, part of my senior management team. And again, just to refresh people's memory, we have about 8,500 units of housing, which is owned and managed by the County Council, predominantly in Blythe, but we still hold the stock in Alnwick as well. Something which people again conflate and confuse, and I think causes confusion, is Homes for Northumberland, HFN. So just need to be clear, HFN as an organisation ceased to exist in 2015. County Council. So up until that point, HFN was referred to as an ALMO, an arm's length management organisation. So the council always owned the stock, but it had a management company in the form of HFN managing it. 2015, County Council took the decision to actually collapse the ALMO and bring the management back into Northumberland County Council. So HFN is a term we can't get away from. It's often referred to. Causes great noise sometimes, but that's just by the by.
Is it still on the van? I'm sure it's
It is.
Big mistake.
It is, and that comes back to sort of vacant replacement. And there may be an argument to actually use it as a brand in some way, shape, or form for reasons I'll come on to. But yes, so when we talk about housing, this is Northumberland County Council as a housing provider, as a landlord, in the same sort of context and guise as you think about carbon, Benicia, etc. And so we've got about 8,500 homes. The paper which is presented is there. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at it. I wasn't going to go through it page by page. Again, I'm going to invite Susan to comment, should you wish to sort of elaborate on anything I've said. There's a number of recommendations set out within the report. That's the way I was blessed to see with, and I would say people are print, it's one or the other. There's a number of recommendations set out within the report. One thing just to sort of highlight is bullet point 1, it talks about undertaking within service of peer review exercise with an appropriate local authority resident social housing provider. And there may be an alternative way forward for us at this point in time, which we're in discussion with the regulator of social housing, to see if we want to put part of a pilot assessment process, but that's yet to be determined. I think the high level things for me are, when you look at the background to this, what this is all about, well, when you look at the background to this, Social Housing Regulation Bill stems from the tragic incident at Grenfell Town. And post that, the government were clear that they wanted to give greater powers to tenants and also greater powers to to a regulator of housing. So since Grenfell, 2017, there's been a number of pieces of work done around building safety. So there's all this work you'll see on the television about panels and panel replacement, etc., etc. But behind that, there's also been this work about looking at strengthening the voice of tenants and also strengthening the role of regulation. So one of the early things we saw was the white paper, which was a chart, and importantly, it was referred to as a chart for social housing residents. And again, that was the government trying specifically to make sure that people were treated equally as residents. The feeling being that because the people sometimes are tenants, they are treated differently, or there's a stigma attached to it. So it was a chart for social housing residents. That piece of white paper obviously worked its way through, and then we sort of morph into what is the Social Housing Regulation Bill. Social Housing Regulation Bill in its current guise has been through the third reading in both houses, so it's at that third stage. And where we're sitting at now is the amendment stage. So how it's been through the sort of parliamentary process, there will have been amendments tabled from that. I mean, from the Commons alone, there was over 100 amendments being proposed. And I think there's a similar number from the Lords as well. Now, some of those amendments will be quite simple, quite straightforward. Some of them, though, will be very much driven by what's happening at any one particular point in time within the housing world. And quite clearly what we've seen following the tragic death of our Ishak in Rochdale and the report of the coroner last year is a much higher focus on mould and damp. So we're expecting greater sort of regulation or specific regulation on mould and damp. It's a specific recommendation or specific amendment that's being proposed, potentially move towards senior executives within housing. So this would extend to the county council as well, having to be formally qualified in a housing subject or working towards a qualification. And that would extend not only to senior executive, but also to senior managers in housing. And if you like, I'm not saying it's a quick, well, I suppose the analogy I would draw, it's a bit like sort of a direct adult social care. It's giving a named person that level of responsibility and that person being accountable for the delivery. Ultimately, the accountability will rest with Helen Patterson and rest with the council. But what I can't stress enough is the actual change this will bring to social housing, the regulation of social housing and the focus on social housing. Some of you may remember from the district days, the Audit Commission and what we refer to as Chloe's Key Lines of Inquiry. That was the last time that local authorities were regulated as a housing provider. There has been a degree of regulation within registered providers such as Carbon Peninsula, etc., but there has been little or no focus on local authorities or regulation of local authorities. This is game changing. This brings all local authorities into the same arena, into the new arena. Because behind all of this will be the new regulated social housing. That is being developed now. They're looking at how that will work, how we'll get consumer regulation, etc., etc. And they will have, in quite simple terms, the power to take into action against housing providers, seek improvements, and I think the language that's been used, and Susan and I have been in a number of these things, power to name and shame. So if the housing providers are not delivering against what will be the consumer standards or consumer regulation standards, there is risk of intervention and there is risk of being named and shamed in that process. Now, we obviously would like to think we provide a good housing service and we've got a fairly good housing revenue account. So we are managing our estates, we are managing our services, we are delivering improvements, we're delivering repairs, we're delivering affordable housing. That does not though mean we will be compliant. There is work for us to do as an organisation and we cannot be complacent. So a couple of things we are doing is through Susan and leading by Susan, we are looking at actually a bit of a self-assessment and improvement plans for actually taking ourselves forward. We do have to, and it's set out within the report, identify named officers for compliance with health and safety and compliance with consumer standards as well. So they will be senior managers within the housing service. Going forward, they will be the named individuals. But what we're also trying to do and we have started the process, and hopefully Susan and I are having a conversation about this later on this afternoon. We are looking to put some growth into housing as well. So for those who remember the Housing Revenue Account Medium-Term Financial Plan, which was presented full council on the 22nd of February, within that there were, doing some memory, 11 recommendations. One of those recommendations was to actually recognise growth. So some of the rental increase that was agreed on that evening is actually intended to put growth into the service and create additional salary capacity, because it is that capacity that we need to be able to respond to what's coming through here. Now, some of this will regularise what's already there, because if you like, in the past, there's been approached by government, which has basically said, well, we'll regulate the private sector. You know, I was saying before about decent homes, where we're talking about now regulating the private sector with decent homes. There's equally been things in the private sector which haven't applied to us, and they're now looking at applying to local authorities, such as electrical certification, electrical inspection. It all applies to the private sector. Doesn't particularly apply to us in terms of the regulations how they're applied. So we're looking at how we respond to that. And the other thing we're looking at, not just how we respond to that in terms of, you know, boots on the ground to do it, it's how do we internally have, how do we as a service have the ability to give the assurance to Helen Patterson and others that we are compliant with the standards themselves. So we are looking at developing sort of compliance assurance within the housing service as well, which will be a critical friend to the delivery functions, if that makes sense. So I think for me, you know, I'm saying it is what it is. It is what it is. It is likely, because I say we haven't got royal assent yet, it is likely that we will see this all coming into fruition April 1st, 2024. There are certain parts of it around tenant satisfaction measures which have already been implemented, because you have to report on them at the end of March 2024. So again, we're doing work on that as well. I'll pause at that point. Susan, I don't know if Susan wants to add to it.
I think you probably asked.
Sorry.
That's right.
Stolen your thunder.
Yes, I've already written down here.
Oh, right.
I said that one. I think the only thing that I think I would sort of emphasise is it's very much about our relationship with our tenants.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, Phil mentioned about Grenfell, and the idea from there was that those tenants weren't listened to. So, you know, yes, we're going to have to adhere to all the consumer standards, but there's a part in there about tenant involvement, you know, tenant empowerment and that type of thing. And it's about us making sure that tenants are listened to, but also that we've got to start, you know, we've got to start getting them involved in development and scrutinising the housing service.
Yeah.
So that's something, you know, that's a big piece of work going forward, just making sure that they're in there listening or actually developing the service that they want. So I think that, you know, that's important. And then just, you know, Bill mentioned inspection, and we do know that they are going to be proactively inspecting us, you know, probably on a four-yearly basis, and it could be something like an Ofsted inspection. We don't know at this stage. They don't, you know, they're doing pilots at the moment, and obviously we potentially might be going into one later on in the year. But at this point, we don't know what, but it could be something to the extent of Ofsted. So, you know, I think what Phil, just to reiterate what Phil said, really, this is huge for us. This is, you know, this is something completely different, and it is huge.
Well, if I could just go first, because my question was going to be linked to what you've just said, and it's sort of possibly slightly unfair ahead of the assessment, the internal assessment that you're going to do. But if the inspectors were to come in now and they were to say we're coming in on Monday, what would you sort of lie awake over the weekend worrying about? I mean, what sort of areas do you think?
I think that's slightly unfair. I don't sleep at the best of times. I think, joking aside, I think if you go back to the point that Susan's just made, you know, it's difficult for us to comment because we're not sure what the assessment's going to look like in any case.
Yeah.
What they're going to do is they're going to look at things probably which are current and focused. I'd be very surprised if they don't ask us about mold and damp.
Yeah.
Very surprised if they don't ask about mold and damp.
Yeah.
You know, we've already had to supply some information to Secretary of State, et cetera, I think that would be the first one. The other piece of work that's coming through in here is a strengthening in the relationship between the regulator and the housing ombudsman.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, again, it would be about how do you manage and how do you deal with inquiries, complaints, whatever you want to call them from your tenants. So what's your relationship? And I think the other thing would be the tenant involvement aspect.
Yeah.
It would be, in my mind, tenant focused.
Yeah.
That would be the questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I'm sorry to sort of speak, but that's a really good, useful answer.
It was very much that. Alec has a high, relatively high percentage of council houses compared to most. I'm interested because I was on the board, they prevented for Northumberland board, and I had good aspects. One of them was tenant involvement. I thought that's not bad at all. But the last time I went to a tenants meeting actually was involved for Northumberland. So you're right to mention it, because I suspect that we have to do things differently. I guess you're going to have statutory or at least regular tenant meetings. Is that what you're thinking about?
Well, I mean, again, we do that now, and I'll let Susan go into detail about what we do now. I mean, we did, you're absolutely right, we did, we did post HFN, introduce tenant forum, tenant voice, etc. And then linked into, I think what was called, I'll look at Sean here, headcag.
Yes.
Something which was a previous iteration of a sort of a mini scrutiny type thing. And we did try and bring tenants into that. The challenge with it was, I mean, totally truthful, it was very difficult to get the tenants to come forward with their issues. And often it was very much about personal issues. The challenge, I think, for us in the bigger picture is how do you get appropriate representation to what you're trying to engage with. So we are doing some work around tenant involvement. I think the portal is probably worth mentioning as well.
Yeah.
So
I think the thing, Councillor Castle, with Horton and Northumberland, we had tenants on the board.
Yeah.
So, so tenants at that point that could directly
Yeah.
influence. And I think when we came back in the county, and when we came into the county, tenant involvement, it just nationally sort of nosedived.
Fell away.
It fell away. So, it wasn't seen as important. But obviously, since Grenfell and with this, it's sort of come back. It's come right back up to the top of the agenda again. And we do have a tenants alliance, and when we are, Phil mentioned earlier on about getting more resources and getting more staff. We're bringing tenant involvement coordinators to get out there, talk to the tenants, get the tenants involved. But also on our website, we're developing a tenant portal so that tenants can actually have direct access into the portal. Initially it's going to be just looking at things like their rent accounts and repairs, but they can start having conversations with us, and we'll be doing lots of surveys. Part of, and Phil mentioned it, part of the regulatory bill is they brought out tenant satisfaction measures. There's a whole list of those. So we're starting collecting satisfaction surveys, that type of things. So we're slowly building to get to where it is, but there's no doubt we're going to get out there and start talking to our tenants. And the other thing the regulator's really keen on is about getting to know your tenants. So it's about knowing everything that we can about those tenants, their vulnerabilities, whatever it might be. So yeah.
Yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. To Councillor Dale.
Can I just add, the regulator sounds a terrible, horrific name. I don't know what it is, obviously, but it will be obviously a significant change to the work you're doing and actually your responsibility as well. And will it be a regional regulator? It'd be interesting to see. I mean, you probably can't say at the moment how it will work.
no, it's a national. They've picked the name, not us.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is
It'll be a national regulator.
right. And the other one was just going on from what Gordon was saying, was I know the council has a right to enter properties, but you still have, there used to be where you could do an annual inspection. And I don't know whether it's changed.
No,
Sorry, I'll just go before you go on, before you tell me off.
Right.
There used to be, anyway, because this was going back to housing stock, and we did the DSO and all that. But what I was going to ask you was, part of very much is about education, about how you manage your house, and getting everybody to work together about their issues, their problems, and working it out with you in partnership. So you can.
I'll do the first part, and Susan can deal with the second part. I think I was mentioned.
It's just about, can I just say, it's about learning about me and
Yeah.
things about keeping a garden, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about housing and how you manage circulation and all this, everything like that.
So it's very interesting actually in terms of our ours as a landlord. There's an assumption that because we are the council and we are the landlord, we can enter at any time.
No,
We can't.
no, no.
It is somebody's home. There are only certain grounds upon which we could enter somebody's home. And it's not generally within housing legislation, it's antisocial behaviour powers, etc., etc. And often, when we have challenging issues to deal with, and we've had several of those hoarding issues, we've got to sort of try and find the most appropriate means, which is sometimes through environmental health or others. So the fact that we are landlord doesn't just give us that ultimate ability to enter. What I would say, and this again was a consequence of COVID, we did have an active programme of doing tenancy audits. So we would expect an estate officer to access and do an audit of the home on an annual, well, on a 3-year cycle, as it were. And that was by consent agreement. Obviously, some of that disappeared because of COVID. And we're now picking that back up again. But that is, it's a bit like how we police in this country by consent. A lot of what we do as a landlord is by consent. And actually, if you look specifically at what you may call housing powers as opposed to antisocial behaviour, etc., it can be quite frustrating, well, because often for us as a landlord, it's a nuclear option. It's an eviction. We can issue letters, we can give advice, we can do this. But actually, our real own power from a housing perspective is possession. So we do find other ways. In terms of, I think the question you asked about education, it's probably useful for Susan to deal with that, but I just mention the work from home as well.
Yeah, can I just all I'm saying is that way, if you've got right to enter, which I'm sure they used to do, go around the housing maintenance and all the stuff across the year, but it just actually minimises your risk.
In terms of having the right
of making sure that the houses are fit for purpose of the regulator.
I mean, yeah, it is Phil said, you know, pre-COVID we did tenancy audits. We are kicking them back up again. So we'll trying to be in every one of our properties every 3 years. But what we are also doing is we're looking at doing a bit of a restructure and bringing more of a supportive role with our estate officers, because you know, we talk about vulnerable people, and there's so many vulnerable people out there as our tenants, and what you're talking about, trying to educate people. So we are doing that, starting off that work, working with them. We do a lot of work with adults and children's, and you know, because obviously we've got the same sort of client groups, and we're doing a lot of work there and what we can do to try and help and support the tenants as much as we can. We've just actually finished a work, it was an ASF project in the north of Tyne. It was working homes where we've been doing like employability, trying to get tenants back into work. And we actually, with our tenants, we've got 70 of our tenants into work, which I thought was amazing. But it's ended now, that funding. We're actually looking now, is there another way we can start funding that to keep things like employability officers going, so that we can try and do as much as we can to help support our tenants.
Yeah. So I think what I would just, if I just come in, I think there's two comments I would make, which probably relate to the three of us actually. Sometimes the worst thing you can do is give a set of keys to somebody because you're setting them up to fail. And our last option is eviction. So whatever we can do in between that, or actually no, I'll go back. Whatever we can do to prevent that, because Susan's looking at restructuring her team is to create this more, not more support team, but this team which will very much look at new tenancies and new tenants to say, well, are there any sort of, they might be eligible for a house, but will they be able to sustain the tenancy? What is the level of support and assistance they need? Because at the moment, it's the classic scenario where we're probably spending 80% of our time plus on 20%, 10% of our tenants. And that prevents some of the estate officers just doing the general estate management issues, you know, the gardens, the fences type thing. So the idea is to try and have a much more targeted approach to that pre-tenancy, identifying what the support needs on, supporting them through that process, so that, you know, fundamentally, we then have hopefully houses maintained in a better condition. We hopefully have, you know, better rent collection levels. We hopefully have less antisocial behaviour, etc., and we hopefully have more sustained tenancies. That's, you know, that's the broad ambition we're trying to get to.
And do all social housing providers have to sign up to this as well?
Oh, I know we're not signing up to it.
No. Are all social housing providers going to be regulated?
Yes.
So the big ones, they're going to have.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you
for that.
Councillor Morfitt and then Councillor Gallagher.
Thanks. There was one bullet point in the report that caught my eye. It says that the council will be held responsible for supporting tenants to hold councillors to account.
Keep my head down.
So, individual councillors get held accountable for the quality of social housing in their own wards. What does that statement mean?
I think it's not, individual councillors will not be held responsible for the condition in their ward. What I think it's really, what it's referring to is if you are a Cardinal of Benicia, you are accountable to your board, and it's your board who have that knowledge and oversight. If you're a county council, yes, it's the collective council, it's the cabinet, it's the chief executive, but there's always been mechanisms by which tenants of other social housing could seek the assistance of their ward councillor if they were concerned about their housing conditions. And I know they do it in an informal process, but sometimes with the Ombudsman Code, there is an ability to actually seek direct access to a councillor as part of a housing resolution.
May I come in that answer, please? Directly on that answer, how she called Louise, the person who now taking the job now, she's the link between the council and the local area housing. It was a guy from Manville has recently changed, but I find out quite constantly. So I will get a tenant coming to me and saying, this is a problem I've got here. Well, I can't answer it, so I'll go to her. She gets it done. So my experience is so.
Is that new?
That's Louise, the estate officer.
Oh, right.
That's the time I was going.
Yes, the estate
Yeah,
officer.
That has been working quite adequately in my personal experience.
Yeah.
At least I think it has in the sense.
But that's what we want, council, you know, that's great, if you know, to me,
Yes.
comes to you about any sort of housing problem, brilliant, you can then just pass it on to us, you know, and that's how it should work,
That's working. I said that it has been working last couple of years quite well.
Yeah. I think the reality is, you know, if you are a provider of services, and in this case a landlord, and you've got 8,500 houses, you are going to get complaints, you are going to get inquiries. That is part of the nature of the business, as it were. But the important thing is how you respond to it.
So I think we can reassure Nick that he's not going to have to get a screwdriver out.
Probably hasn't got any council houses.
Slightly more formal fashion than I currently have.
Not stop.
I think strictly speaking, you could now, but yes, that is a possibility because I think the ambition is to make landlords accountable and have a means by which they can be held to account. Whether that's because again, you know, if you go back to the regulator is likely to have a 4-year inspection programme based upon risk probably. It will also be informed by potentially the housing ombudsman. So the housing ombudsman, you know, dealing with matters might have a concern about an authority and might highlight that with the regulator. Say, I think you need to be looking at this authority sooner rather than later type thing. Well, if you like, what the ambition is rather than just having the regulator coming in once every 4 years, A, we will self-report and provide assurance, but B, there is a broader mechanism for all social housing residents to access ward councils, et cetera, to escalate and highlight their issues. It is a way of actually just not increasing, I suppose, yes, increasing the scrutiny and focusing the response on the housing provider because of ward councils involved, whether it's Ulster or otherwise.
Thanks. Could I ask a second quick question?
Yes.
Could you just explain the difference between the housing ombudsman and the regulator of social housing? I haven't quite got my head around it.
Well, I suppose in simple terms, the housing ombudsman exists now. And if you look at the housing ombudsman would deal with complaints raised by tenants, etc., in this case related to housing, where their general language would be where there's been maladministration leading to injustice. So the process ordinarily and expected by the ombudsman is that whether it's a housing provider or county council, you have an internal complaints procedure, you know, whether that be about you haven't done my repair or otherwise. That goes through your internal procedures of stage 1, stage 2, and if person will happen, they then have the ability to go to the ombudsman, and the ombudsman will look at not necessarily the specifics of the issue, but how that complaint has been handled and managed, and did that in any way lead to maladministration. What the regulator is looking at is the much broader question of how you operate and function as a housing provider. What's your governance? Do you meet the tenant satisfaction measures? Do you meet the consumer regulation standards, etc., etc.? It is an audit of your business and delivery of your business. I feel like the ombudsman is very much about individual issues and complaints.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report and I welcome the timely report. I'm mindful it's the 5th and this will be delivered to Cabinet on the 11th. So for me, that's the right way that we're making the points before. So we can have a clearer view. The three questions, and I want to pick up on a statement you said before. One of the questions is the inspections. I welcome the whole idea of tenants, feedback, involvement, and dare I say complaints. But inspections will cover the gas, the electric, and you've highlighted the damp and also fire hazards as well. Do we feel as though we've got the capacity to do that? And on the back of that, obviously, you mentioned something about growth for salary. I would like to try and think they're looking in the future that we have apprentices to deal with this. And the reason why I bring this up is I know that the capacity for the private sector is very, very difficult in respect of all of those inspections. So that's the first part. And the second part for Phil is that I think you couldn't have said anything right. It's we don't want to set anybody up for failure. So we're getting tenants in there. You know, you're finding somewhere for them to go, and then straight away they don't know how to pay the bills, how to handle the money. And these new officers that may come in will be of benefit. And I think we all know people that have moved into properties thinking it's the bee's knees and haven't got a clue of the responsibilities of having their own place. Right. And it shouldn't just fall on the whole idea. In these difficult times with electric and all the overheads of life, people will not pay the rent, so we have to emphasise that that's your priority. But that is a classic statement that we need to help residents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, going with your first question, in terms of inspections, assurance, capacity to deliver, if you're talking about the actual physicality of doing it, and I'm going to say these are reasonably accurate, but I'm not going to say they're accurate. This off the top of my head. If you look at the moment what our statutory inspection responsibilities are around gas servicing, so that's an annual CP12 gas safety inspection, we're probably at 99%. And the reason we haven't got 100% is probably down to no access on behalf of the tenant. So we already have these systems in place, and what we will have to do for the regulator is report to the regulator what our performance has been, because they will then use that to inform where this is. If somebody's reporting they've only done 30%, that's going to raise a red flag for the regulator. Currently, we're doing about 99% plus. There are areas where we've already identified that we need to strengthen. So electrical safety is one area mentioned. So we're not currently caught by what's the private sector regulation of inspection and test every 5 years. That's the model we're moving to. And actually part of the growth is trying to actually look at having resources to ensure we've got that level of inspection capacity in the team or supervision within the team. So can I sit here and say, oh, well, everything's all right? Well, I would never say that, because there's always a risk, but we're already doing the gas safety, we're already doing the other things. I think for me, it's sometimes about just making sure we've got access to the information in a usable fashion, and we're making the best use of the information we've got to inform what we do. You asked about apprenticeships. We have previously operated with apprenticeships, and I would absolutely echo what you've said, that I don't think it matters what area or what sector you look at, recruitment retention is a challenge. If I look at the areas for which I'm responsible for, I can pull out half a dozen areas I've got a challenge on in the moment. Even though I've got demand for services, I'm struggling to recruit this person or that person. It's exactly the same when you look at housing and housing trades. Some of it's down to the private sector because they're simply offering more cash than we can offer them. Some of it's down to lack of skills, because there has been a move away from what people refer to as wet trade, because people don't like getting their hands dirty, etc., etc. But yes, we have gone through and we have retained apprenticeships as well. And I think one of the ambitions we've probably got, although Susan and I haven't spoken about this, logically, one of the key ambitions for us in terms of working homes is trying to get our tenants to become our apprenticeships, to become our workforce. That's, you know, that's a fairly obvious thing for us to try and do. So we're doing all of that. The final comment you made there, Councillor Gallagher, was around, you know, this thing that we don't want to set it out to fail. You know, it's as simple as that. We want to invest as much as we can. What I would say, and again, I'm going to ask Susan to comment, we already do a lot of work with our tenants to try and ensure they maintain their tenancy. We've just got the annual performance in for income collection, and, you know, exceptional. It's 100.x%. If I'm getting this right.
0.62%.
100.62%, which sounds a weird figure. Again, the 100.62% is actually rent and collection arrears at the same time. We're still seeing arrears though, but we are still trying to actively work with tenants. And I think our income team have a very, very good track record of working with tenants to minimise the level of arrears that they get, so it doesn't become an insurmountable problem. So trying to tackle low level arrears early on in the system. Again, we've probably secured in excess of £400,000 plus in additional benefit this year. So there's a lot of stuff we're doing. I think for me, we just need to be in that position whereby we can, as it were, apply a critical friend to that internally in terms of having that resource, but actually just be able to look at all this data in the round and say, right, what does that tell us about the service? And more importantly, what does that tell the regulator about the service as well? And that's where we need to get to.
Yeah, just to come back on one point, and it's a really good point around apprenticeships. The apprenticeships, the biggest problem that people have to travel and move out the area for to do apprenticeships. I'm involved with an industrial alliance group, and it's the link between local housing and work.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is to look inwards to people that you offer houses to, mm-hmm. is of a benefit, mm-hmm. to the community, and to obviously to Northumberland as well. And dare I say, I've been really shallow at the country because we're absolutely struggling for quality trained apprenticeships that have got skills, mm-hmm. that aren't just linked onto one specific, that they are multi-skilled and they can move in and out of industry.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may finish with the last question, if you're a Benicia or a Carbon tenant and you phone up with an issue about your house, you're speaking to a team that only deals with housing. Whereas if you phone the county council, you're speaking to a team that deals with potholes, with revs and bends, with adult social care, and so on. Do you think when all of this stuff comes in, we're going to need to make some changes to sort of?
Yes.
What do you say? It's a chance, Phil, before you leave to do the big ask.
I think when you look at it, and it comes back to what we said at the beginning of this is about the housing service being visible, not just in the county council, which I think there's still work to do on that. It's being visible to the tenant and it's being accessible to the tenant. So we have to look at what are the channels, you know, through which people contact us. And I know we've got obviously the improvement program ongoing, etc. Part of that looks at customer experience. We want to heavily influence that whole agenda around customer experience because we probably have the most contact with a customer than any other part of the council. And I think what's really important to understand is that, yes, we as a county council will collect council tax from residents and we will deliver services to residents in the round. We also collect rent from our tenants. And our tenants by default are entitled to those services that its landlord should provide. So I would say it's not a case of, well, they're entitled to what everybody gets. They're actually entitled to a higher level of service through its housing service. And the housing service has to be accessible to them. And we've got to be accountable to them as well.
Great. Well, I think that was really fascinating. Both reports. Thank you very much. And I don't know whether you'll be back here before you leave, Phil. But if you're not, then just I'm sure you know, everybody, I speak on behalf of everybody, I mean, certainly, you know, everybody that's dealt with you is, incredibly professional and thank you very much.
Yeah.
Everything you've done for Northampton County Council and Tynedale before that, so thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I may come back actually for seeing the public gallery for the scrutiny session. But no, thank you very much. And if people aren't aware, yes, I actually leave on the 18th of May.
So,
And I've got, I think, with annual leave, Christmas, and Christmas, Easter's probably the only thing. I think I've got probably 20 working days left of the council.
right.
After 43 years, I'm stressed.
I was going to say, can I just say, I first came to Cotswold 28 years ago. As a young lad in Tynedale Council. And he was in housing there. And he's been a great contribution
Yeah.
to Tynedale Council and also to Northampton County Council. We went through all the housing
Yeah.
transfer and everything at Tynedale. There are lots and lots of changes and been at the centre.
Interesting time.
Well, thank you for that.
No, we need some recommendations. I think
You need your horse to ride on.
Off into the sunset.
Just one recommendation, that this report is certainly, is a standalone report of this committee. It's not
for the cabinet.
for the cabinet.
Yeah.
And similarly with Becky June back in 6 months or so, it may well be appropriate to do the same with Susan, particularly around the time of contact with the regulator. Sort of give a health check. Where you are.
This report is going to cabinet. Could we just highlight that sort of final point about the fact that, you know, it's going to, because this is other departments, isn't it? You're going to be relying in terms of the customer interface.
Yeah.
On the IT, you know, systems all working together on the call center arrangements and things like that. So it might be just worth highlighting that that's something that's been flagged up that other people in other areas of the business can be thinking about. I'm sure they already are, but
Perhaps we ask the cabinet to either repaint the vans or it's rename the department.
good point. So I think, is that the? So yes, the work programme is on page 85. It's here for information. Anybody, any comments?
So just to point out, there was a bit of a switching room at the time of the agenda dispatch, so the section 106 report was due to come to you at the next week.
Yeah.
We brought that forward to allow Janice to keep it totally around rural bus services. And I think Phil's also got a task and management request at the next meeting as well.
Yeah, but I won't be there.
The office business. Susan.
Yes, excellent.
And just to say the preparations are being made for the next year, whatever that looks like, and we will ask members to do next week is to look back on the issues that we considered this year and see whether or not there's anything that you previously discussed you want to revisit next year's programme, because there's already a lengthy list of things to add. We've got the tree and woodland strategy, we've got the food waste recycling pilots, the consultation that will be coming to you very early in the next year. We've got the fire and rescue, if you remember, concerns raised last week about issues of contamination. We said that we're probably should go back to future meetings to talk about the consequences of that. And then, of course, the ongoing issue of bus services will not be resolved at the next week. That's obviously going to do it. So, and obviously the action plan for the strategy, and probably like it's usually back again to talk about social housing. So there's already a long list of things to add before we even looked at your new priorities. So if they do want to look at, I think that's the earliest option because the programme is already good enough until September, October.
Right. Okay, well done. We'll close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.